off by reintroducing Mr. Igor Skutsenia. Come on down, Igor. If you could take a seat. You've run out of Conor McGregor quotes? Yep. He's run out. Okay, next up, we've got Marcos Balazos, come over from Germany for this. Marcos. Person I've worked with before, a couple of times, known him for a good number of years, 10 years now. Brian Darcy from Infobip, thank you. I met Brian when he was head of wholesale for O2 here in Dublin. Next, we've got Carlos da Silva from PCCW Global. And we have Bart van den Bemt from Bix. Welcome. We know who Lank is, so you don't need to introduce yourself. Marcus, could you like to introduce yourself, what you do, and what your company does?
Yes. So I'm from Deutsche Telekom Global Carrier. This is the wholesale unit from Telekom Deutschland, GmbH. I'm Marcos Balazos, product manager for voice and mobile services, and especially interested in the SMS replacing topic flash calling.
Thank you. Brian, if you could pass the clicker down to Carlos. Thank you very much, because I know Carlos will be having a little presentation coming up soon after the introductions.
Perfect. So, nice to meet you all. My name is Brian Darcy from Infobip. I am Director of Business Development within Telecoms, so primary focus is on security and monetization. Infobip is a CPaaS company. Some people would say know them as more on the aggregation side, but fundamentally they are a CPaaS company working with over 11,000 brands on one side, and also very strong relationships with mobile operators. So over 800 direct connections for SMS termination. So almost an end-to-end ecosystem. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm Carlos da Silva. I'm in charge of the mobility products for PCCW Global. PCCW Global is part of the Hong Kong Telecom Group. We are the international telecoms arm. Our focus is to serve enterprises, operators, and wholesalers in domains of data, voice, hyperscalers, so on and so forth. But also when we work with the mobile operators, help them for all their kinds of services. And I'm in charge of protecting and monetizing their SMS incoming traffic.
Okay. And Bart.
Morning. My name is Bart van den Bemt. I'm working at Bix in the product organization, looking after our CPaaS, A2P, and a virtual number product.
Fantastic. And Bix, you work globally. So I remember I did some work with MTN carrier services many, many years ago, and Bix took over MTN carrier services. So you've had a long, long history. So very warm welcome to you all. The panel will start with a short presentation framing our ensuing discussion. That's going to come from Carlos from PCCW. So take it away. You've got the clicker. The green button should work.
All right. So thank you. So it's going to be short, only 3-4 slides, but it's a way to understand the dynamics of a business. It's to follow the money, look at the economics of it, and just those what these slides are trying to do. So without getting big numbers, I let Mobile Square and others get into the exact numbers, but if we look at big chunks of traffic, we can look at the business messaging, which is essentially A2P. And A2P splits between a large chunk of traffic that is domestic and a large chunk of traffic, or a smaller chunk of traffic that is international. What's the difference between international and domestic? Is a brand that sends SMS to more than one market is an international traffic, as that will be the cases of Amazon, FedEx, and so on and so forth, where domestic will be the local bank or the local school. So international is much smaller, but it splits again into two different types of SMSs, notifications, and one-time passwords, or authentication. And something that's interesting to notice is that one-time passwords in the international traffic is the big chunk, by far, of that international traffic. In some cases, it might be over 90% of the traffic in some markets. It varies by market, but it's always a big chunk of traffic. Another thing that is not in this slide, but must be understood from an economics point of view, is that although the international market is much smaller than the domestic market, because of regulations and other dynamics, in a lot of markets, the international traffic is the one that brings the most revenue, because prices are much higher in international than they are in domestic. So keep that in mind, because what happens in the international traffic? What have we seen when we look at fraud on that market? So again, it splits into international notifications and one-time passwords. Another thing to know in the one-time passwords is that 10 to 20 brands only worldwide carry more than 80% of that traffic worldwide. So it's very, very, very concentrated in just a few brands that carry 80% of probably 80% of the international SMS traffic. And these brands have been suffering from two types of frauds. Trashing, which also impacts notifications, but more importantly and lately is artificial...
Carlos, could you just explain what trashing is? Because we've got a very wide and varied audience online
Absolutely.
as well.
So what is trashing? Trashing is a brand sending 10 SMSs, being told that the 10 SMSs got delivered to a destination, but in fact only 7 SMSs got delivered, 3 were trash. Trash means they were dropped. What does that mean? It means that from the vendor that is transiting these SMSs, since they only paid to terminate 7 out of the 10 they received, they're increasing their margins, or they're able to reduce the price and compete on price. So trashing enables aggregators, and only the few that resort to that, obviously it's not all of them, but enable some aggregators to manipulate their cost base and compete. But that's done at the expense of the brand, and the end users that don't receive the SMS have to click retry, which again generates another SMS. So that's trashing. And it can be done just for manipulation of a cost base and competition. The other part is artificial traffic. So you generate fake traffic. You simulate being a user, going to a website, say, I lost my password, can you send me a one-time password? It sends a one-time password. By just doing that, you generated a message. If you do that with bots and you generate millions of them, then you generate a large chunk of revenue. And artificial traffic now is done in combination with trashing because you want to hide from the MNO and from the users that you are creating this artificial traffic. So there is a combination of that. That combination is done by also helping artificial price inflation, sorry. So when you can generate traffic, and we see now the market dynamics moving into a lot of commitments, exclusivity deals, et cetera, and that calls for a commitment and a price. So when you have to compete with 3, 4 other vendors that are trying to win that exclusivity, and the requirement is a commitment, you increase the commitment. And to increase the commitment, you can do price increase or artificial traffic, or often the two of them combined. So that leads to a price inflation that we've all heard about, and that's an impact. The impact here, the first one we heard quite loudly, is Elon Musk from Twitter saying, there's all this traffic that I didn't not generate, but I have to pay for it. I'm not going to do that anymore. And what we've seen recently is a lot of OTTs disputing their invoices, saying, I'm not going to withhold payments because they don't think that all the traffic they're charged for has been truly generated by the end users. So that's a problem. And this is driving these brands, these 10, 20 brands, to say if traffic is increasing, price is increasing, artificial traffic is increasing, how do I solve this? So they're looking for alternatives. And what are the alternatives? And again, it's just 10 to 20 brands that we have to convince that are looking for these alternatives. So you have SMS OTP, which is the best solution. It's ubiquitous, users know it, it's perfect. The only problem, it's not priced correctly. Or at least in some markets, it's priced too high. So that drives the users of SMS OTP to look for alternatives. Alternatives, you all heard about flash call, voice call, text-to-speech, et cetera, et cetera.
But there's many more. I'm just going to interrupt you here. But you mentioned that. You mentioned the issue being the commercial model, in your word, the price. But what about the fraud perspective? People are seeing more fraud in the SMS channel. And you just look at the newspapers here in the UK, never mind in other countries. But, sorry, thank you. UK. I'm not in Omnichannel in London. Thank you very much. I do apologise. No disrespect intended to the country I'm in. In Ireland, I'm sure it's the same here. Well, I know this is why we have an SMS sender ID registry, because there were issues with smishing, with the health. What's your health? HSE. Thank you, with the HSE here in Ireland. So this is the result, and the result of that is we were approached about creating an SMS sender ID registry here in Ireland. So I know there are issues here in the press, but. So what about the whole security perspective of SMS? That's hits, literally front page news here in Ireland, in the UK, in the US with the FCC coming in. So it's not just the commercial model though, is it?
It's not. So, and actually that goes to the last option here. I'll talk to that just on this slide, because indeed there is, the the stakeholders of the industry that look at it from a business point of view see price increasing. If you're just an end user or a regulator, you're not really aware of these price increases that happen on the wholesale level. What you're concerned about SMS is it risky or is it as safe as I think that is safe? And everybody will agree that not using a one-time password is not secure. So using SMS is much better than not using one-time password. But once you use a one-time password, is SMS the most secure solution? There's some debate about that. But sticking just for a while on the economics of it, so just looking at brands that look at the pricing increase, they look at alternatives. So the alternative is flash call, voice call, etc. It's potentially ubiquitous because everybody can receive a phone call, but it's complex to monetize, complex to install. It has not picked up as much as personally I think we hear in the industry. So it's still it's an interesting solution, but it's not a replacement of SMS. Then you have other solutions like silent authentication and other network SIM options. You heard the GSMA coming up with an API solution, etc. Those are secure solutions. They're potentially ubiquitous, but they're not cheap. They're expensive. And then you have the latest comer, which is Passkey, so the FIDO Alliance, for which most of the 10 to 20 brands that send one-time passwords are part of. So the FIDO Alliance has come up with a new system that's called Passkey. And Passkey does not use passwords. And if you don't have passwords, it uses biometrics. If you don't have passwords, you don't have one-time passwords. Now, the other thing that is interesting in this one is that it's free. So if you're looking at how do I control my price, how do I reduce the cost, then FIDO is free. And it's more secure because it's biometric, so you cannot argue about security. If your problem with SMS is not the cost, but is it safe, can it be intercepted, can it be a SIM swap and also other things, then FIDO is a perfect answer as well because it is actually most secure. Now the problem with FIDO is that it's only, a passkey is only a few months old, so it's unknown in the market and, and the penetration is close to zero. But everybody in the industry that has to do a business case, a 1 to 3 years business case, has to make a judgment on what's going to happen with these solutions in the next 3 years. Because something's going to happen. Whether you believe, you bet that it will stay on SMS, everything else is going to be noise and status quo in 3 years, SMS is still 90% of the one-time password, or you go to the opposite and you say in 3 years' time, 90% of the authentication is on FIDO because it's cheaper, it's secure, etc. Everybody has to make a judgment call on that. Now, just out of sake of hypothetical, let's assume that SMS, whether one of these solutions, flash call, FIDO, whatever, moves away from SMS. OTP moves away from SMS. What does it mean? Well, it means that OTP goes from being 90% of the international traffic to being 0.5%. The first conclusion, we don't see it here, is that it means that there is much less volumes and revenue in the international market. It doesn't mean that notification is going to grow to replace OTP. It just means that the market has shrunk. Now, that's a bad news. The good news is there is no more artificial traffic, or it's much harder, because without OTP, there is no artificial traffic to generate. So we solve that problem, which is the biggest problem we have now. But we also get the focus of the industry to create new revenue, new value, by looking at the customer, the end user, and what can we do to create value. Instead of creating artificial traffic, these alternatives to SMS, etc., what other value can we create? And there's a lot of things that can be done. Here I just list a few. So better user fraud defense. So let's focus on smishing. And not just, well, we already focus on smishing, but let's focus even more on smishing since we don't have to worry about artificial traffic and things like that. We can create more value with two-way SMS, which is done a little bit, but not too much. We can look at MMS for RCS Lite. Right? We see RCS is growing, but there's still a lot of things that SMS can do to provide value, more value to the end user. End-to-end encryption is something that can also be created. Trusted DLR. You send an SMS, today you don't know if the SMS was received by the end user or not. You cannot trust the DLR. So it creates a lot of trashing and an economics point of view, but there's a lot of use cases that do not happen. Let's say a bank wants to send you a notification, and that notification triggers some kind of legal approval. They want to be sure that you received the SMS. Today they're not sure, so they cannot create that use case. But what if the DLR is trusted? What if there is a two-way SMS and the user is being notified that their stock price is going to increase by this or that or whatever, and they have to reply a random number. They're told, send back 12 to ensure that you receive the SMS. That's a use case that creates more value. And there is other things like that on QoS and SLAs that can be added to the market. So looking at what could happen to a one-time password, it's a negative thing because it will impact the total value of the economic value of the market, but it will also force us to focus on other types of value creation.
Thank you, Carlos. You've very much opened the door to every single channel. Let's start by looking at some of them. Passkey. Igor, what's your take on Passkey? Carlos mentioned it's hardly known. Practically few consumers know this around the world. Do you think it will gain traction? Do you think it will spread?
It will depend on several factors, and I'll be happy to outline hopefully all of them, or at least a major part of them. So the first thing is I'm kind of not that agreeing with Carlos that it's going to be free. Nothing in capitalist world is free. If you're not paying for it, then probably you're a commodity, some tinfoil hat people, but still. There will be cost associated with introducing this passkey solution. There will be costs that probably would be endured by either an ending customer or they would be somehow offset to make sure that there is a financial gain in use of this. And another thing about passkey that I would like to underline is that it's not operator-based. And this is the main difference between the SMS, flash call, pin-to-speech when you're delivering OTP by a voice message. It's not, so it's basically, it's attacking SMS business with all the things and all its features. It's not only about just the SMS prices being too high, therefore justifying the usage of the passkey. Basically, nowhere in the world you have 100% delivery, and passkey is trying to address that as well. There is hopefully no artificial inflation of track with passkey, and this is another thing. There's if you are looking at alternative to SMS that are operator-based, I mean, at least you can play within that field. The operators still have a say in that. They could do flash call, like, for example, they have a technology to bill it properly, to charge it, and to maintain the pricing that is prudent for all the enterprises. With pin-to-speech, the same thing. If you have that difference in cost for the voice channel delivery or SMS channel delivery, you can still stay within that field. OTT may be debatable. I mean, maybe the operators would work out some model of working with Meta about the WhatsApp and Viber, etc. But I mean, this thing, passkey, I mean, it's does just sound, at least on paper, as just an attack on the operators' business and the whole mobile traffic business.
Marcus, so I know your group is one of the groups around the world that actually generates the most from A to P SMS, so as a percentage of your total business. So you as a group have very much embraced A to P SMS, which is fantastic for the industry as a whole. What are you seeing with regards to SMS and authentication? Are you seeing some concern from ultimately enterprise clients, banks, for example, with everything that's coming into the press that SMS is bad, it shouldn't be used for one-time passwords because you've got smishing issues, you've got this, you've got that. How is it impacting you and your company?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes. SMS is still a very important business for Deutsche Telekom. We are more or less not fine with the approach that, for example, flash calling is trying to cannibalizing SMS traffic. On the one hand, flash calling could be seen as some sort of fraud, but on the other hand, it's a new technology which is coming, and if you see the market information we get, flash calling is increasing more and more, and we operators have to assess the options how to monetize flash calling. And so that we could profit from the legacy SMS and. But
your SMS, your core SMS market, and what we're talking about with so much of the traffic, particularly the internationally originated A2P SMS, I'm hearing some operators it's 95% plus is 2FA, two-factor authentication related. You aren't seeing so much impact at the moment from these other channels in terms of your SMS volumes, not yet.
So we are aware of the other options, so we see them in our networks, but not as severe as in other markets.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Brian. I run the Fraud and Revenue Assurance Working Group in MEF. I also run the International Commercial Models working group in MEF, and I see a truckload of overlap between the commercial model and fraud. Infobip, you're a global company. You're managing the telecom solution side, which is global. Are you seeing the rise of newer authentication channels, such as the A2P flash calling Carlos introduced, Marcus has been talking about? Are you seeing those types of channels used more in areas where the commercial model for SMS is higher? Is it simply a case of people are looking for any alternative to get around that? What's your take on it?
Yeah, no, we are. We're definitely seeing alternative technologies. So what's happening is, the price has been driven high. Operators are looking for commitments, looking for high prices. That puts pressure on the market to compete, to try and deliver on those demands. And that makes it very expensive for the brands. So the brands are actively looking for alternative routes to do one-time
So they're coming to you, let's get this straight. The brands are coming to you saying, we can't sustain the bills from you anymore. We need something in plain language, something more cost effective.
Anyone the brands work with, they're saying this. This is kind of, and this has been a comment for quite some time.
And it's not just the big brands which Carlos mentioned.
No, I mean, there's a long tail
Passkey.
at the start. I mentioned we're working with 11,000 enterprise customers because, on one side it might be a one-time password that has a high value, but on the other side it might be a marketing message that they want to send, but because of the high price, they're reluctant, or basically the economics don't work, so they don't send it. So, I mean, if you kind of roll back, very often the person who's not in the room is the brand, so the actual buyer of the message. And what they want to do is they want to fulfill a function, and that function is to authenticate a customer or a user. And how that is done, it's not really a factor. They just want to fulfill a security requirement, right, which is a one-time password. Historically, the best option to do that has been SMS. It's easy, it's ubiquitous. We know all the reasons why SMS is important. But the elephant in the room is the pricing and the commercials, and it has become punitive. So when you look at, in some countries, the price for an SMS has gone 15, 20 cents per message. Then you load on the thrashing, then you load on the inflated traffic, and the real cost is incredibly high. So they're a business. So they've got a business case to say, we've got so much revenue to authenticate customers. Sorry, we've got so much budget to authenticate customers. And pretty soon that business model will break. And if it breaks, we've seen scenarios where some brands just stop using it. They just stop. In a particular country, they may just give up. Or they scramble to look for an alternative.
So you mean they don't authenticate?
They just stop. They just simply stop. Now, it wouldn't be in kind of mainstream countries, but in some of the kind of maybe less developed countries, we've seen them stop. So I think there's an onus here on the industry at large that if we don't collectively come together and do something, we're going to see a seismic shift in the next year, I would think. And there are definitely big threats with the likes of WhatsApp. It was mentioned this morning in the Juniper presentation. It's coming. It's very price competitive.
Because they've changed the commercial model recently, or they're introducing new changes.
In some cases, it's 5, 6, 7 times cheaper than an international A2P. So SMS, SMS is not broken. SMS is a fantastic technology. The pricing has just got too high.
Carlos, very quickly, before I come to Bart.
Very quickly, on the example of brands stopping, we mentioned Twitter on my slides, but Twitter recently said that if you're not a premium user, a paying subscriber of Twitter, there is no one-time password. So they're basically saying, we don't care about you, we're not going to spend money on SMS for the non-premium users. And Elon Musk has set some quite trends on all these big apps. First, to check how much artificial traffic there was on their network, which they were not looking at until Elon Musk made it public. And now there is this, I'm not going to do a one-time passwords for everybody because it's not cost efficient.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bart, so the same question to you actually that I posed to Marcus. So from the BICS perspective, you've got a very, very global outlook. What are you seeing with regards to your clients and the usage of SMS and other channels such as A2P Flash, possibly Passkey, anything else coming in?
We still see a lot of A2P volumes, and I agree with the message of Carlos. The vast majority is one-time password. 80% plus, maybe 90% plus of the A2P traffic we carry is one-time password traffic. That is still there.
So that's domestic and international?
That is, for us, mainly international.
Okay.
the traffic is still there, and we see the A2P market growing, and that was also the message this morning of Juniper. But it's clear that people are looking into alternatives, and I think indeed the cost is a very important driver there. We see flash calls coming up. I think the risk today, or the problem today with flash calls, is that it's a bit of a jungle. There are very little operators who really have, I would say, dedicated incoming flash calls trunks, while they do have those dedicated trunks for A2P, so where you can send your traffic, where your service is going to be delivered. Flash calls very often just go over the transit routes. There is not really protection.
That's very much, though, where A2P SMS was 10 years ago.
Exactly. And I believe if flash calls need to become a success, we should do exactly the same thing as what we did for A2P before. You protect your network as a mobile operator. You have dedicated incoming trunks, and there those flash calls can go. Otherwise, it's never going to work. I think if you look at the voice business in general, CLI modification still happens, maybe more in the past, but still today it happens. If you have a wrong CLI on a flash call, the purpose is gone. On an SMS, even if somebody would play with the metadata to get a cheaper route and they change the A number, you still get your one-time password. At the end of the day, the user still authenticates. And I think that's the main thing for the enterprises. They are looking, how can I get a high conversion rate as much as possible for the cost I'm paying?
That's a really good point, because we as consumers, so if we're expecting in the next 5 to 10 seconds a one-time password, we don't pay much attention to the text at the top of the message, the originator. We don't pay much attention to that.
Exactly.
It could be anything. It could be any number, any text. I just want that number because I want to log into the counter. I want to complete that transaction with that very well-known online e-commerce retailer, whatever it might be. So,
correct. And in a flash call, it's today at least not that guaranteed. We are probably going to move in that direction, but today very little operators are looking into that.
Brian.
Yeah, so actually flash call I think is a really good example of how the market is looking for alternatives. So we said 90% roughly of A2P international SMS is one-time password. Flash call became quite prominent last year, and the use case is 100% of flash call usage is one-time password. So the reason why flash call, I suppose, arrived on the scene was because alternatives were being sought to avoid the high prices. And I think over time, there's challenges to flash calls. So over the last year or so, those challenges have become evident. And now I think the market is about to move to another alternative technology. We're seeing RCS being used, which is interesting. And as I mentioned, WhatsApp.
Perfect. So, Igor Finot, I was going to come to you. So, Lank Telecom have started off their own blogs and video blogs, etc., webinars online. I had the pleasure of being one of the guests on your first ever show, and it was nice. You were in the moderator hot seat, and I was in the speaker hot seat for a change. And Marcus was on there as well. And dare I say it, we're reunited. Yeah. Carlos was on there. We're reunited live. A2P flash calling. We've talked about the commercial model, lots and lots and lots. What about the user experience? Because at the end of the day, the enterprises are the ones left with the bill. But what about the consumers? If we are having to deal with a means of authentication which we're not comfortable with, we don't like, it's very clunky, that has real deep impact on the customer experience and can really negatively impact a brand. So what about it from the customer experience perspective?
Exactly. I mean, I share your perspective that if you don't like the sequence, then there's less of a chance that it's going to be successful for you. And for any brand, that's going to be hard figures that they're going to see in their financial statements, that they see lower conversion for an unfamiliar or unexpected experience or an experience they don't like. And this is exactly why, obviously, it's very nice to look for alternatives. And again, I would like to underline that it's just one side of the issue. That the second side of the issue is that maybe those alternative channels like OTTs and flash calls aren't as good as advertised as well, especially in some markets. And there's a fat chance that they will become, after trying out what is very nice on the advertising, they will become disillusioned and come back to good old SMS.
Well, at the very least, you need a fallback, because
right.
Some well-known OTTs have ceased to work fully, and the outages have been for several hours.
Exactly.
For the largest one out there, twice in the past year.
Exactly, and this is the reality, that SMS still has a lot of leverage, and one of the largest leverages that are still out there, and I believe it is still utilized by many operators, is that it's not only about the cost of delivering a one-time password. It's not about just that. If you're looking at the broader picture, it's about making sure that the brand can authenticate the user that they could have spent $1, $5, $10 attracting it. And if you're trying to skim some prices using a slightly cheaper channel, like you're switching from SMS to flash call from 10 cents to maybe like 2 cents or 1.5 cents for a flash call, and you have lower conversion, then all those not converted users would be lost. And if you're spending $2.5, $3, $5 attracting each and every one of them, this is the thing that the brands would consider as well. And I believe this was one of the things that was stopping brands from fully switching to flash calls, because they have to consider their business as the business for the consumers. And if they're just weighing marketing expenses just because they're trying to save some costs on choosing the channel of OTP delivery, this is not the strategy that would happen there. I'm not saying that you're wrong. It's just the other thing that must be considered if you're trying to make a decision and would like to consider all the factors.
Carlos, quickly before I come to Marcus.
Yeah, I want to say that the brands also care about market confidentiality. So when we say WhatsApp can do and is trying to offer OTP at a lower price than SMS, there's a lot of these 10 to 20 brands that compete with WhatsApp. Their business is to compete with WhatsApp or Facebook. So would we imagine a Viber, a WeChat say, I'm going to send my customers a one-time password to my competitor and let my competitor know how many customers I have in this country, activity, etc., and let them send a message back, oh, by the way, you should use WhatsApp instead of using Viber. So there is also a market confidentiality that SMS guarantees and that you won't find in these other solutions.
Very good point. Marcus, on the commercial model side of things, we know there are certain markets where the SMS commercial model international has changed. It's gone up 100, 200, 300% in the past year, 2 years. That we know. But those are generally outliers. For sure, in many countries, from what I'm hearing from MEF members and you guys, the commercial model has increased. The cost base has increased for enterprises. But in terms of the other means of notification, the other means of authentication and verification, we all remember receiving credit cards in the post. So we received credit cards in one envelope, and probably the separate day, we receive the little window, the scratchy window or something like that. How much does that cost the financial services industry? A lot. You must be looking at €1, €2, €3 for that. And we're here worried, talking about 5 cents extra per authentication or whatever. Marcus, surely we as an industry, we can step in there and say, look, to the enterprises, you're used to spending 3, 4, 5 euros to authenticate that, yes, it really is James Williams who's received his new Amex card in the post. Use that one-time number, but I've received it on the little scratchy window or pull open window, whatever it's called. I apologize. I don't know the proper terminology, but you know what I mean. Not that. But that's something very different, sir. And, but what are we as an industry doing to actually say to people, look, okay, yes, it's not as cost-effective as before, but you know what? It's still fantastic, and it's far more cost-effective than so many other things that you've been using.
Mm. Yeah, okay. With the SMS business, it's also for the future very attractive, yeah? And the new options like flash calling, you might save some cost in the transmission, but people are used to SMS and prefer also in the future SMS, and therefore, but on the other hand, flash calling is a rising threat in the market, and we must be prepared, and therefore it's good to assess the option and also then to see where can I profit from this market and to find solutions for monetization.
But Marcus, is ATP...
Even if it is lower portion of the
But is A2P Flash really a threat? Because if the commercial model for A2P Flash is miraculously the same as A2P SMS, surely then it's not a threat. It's then left to being a choice, because if we look at the user experience issues, the user experience is very different for an iOS and an Android user on Flash. So isn't the commercial model the key here? What would you say?
I would say yes, because yeah, we have the differences between Android and iOS devices, and but yeah, the device industry is changing as well. Maybe you will have the same experience on the iOS part in the future. It's coming, and as we see on market researchers, flash calling is increasing heavily for the next years. And even if it's a small share of the A2P market, as said, we must be prepared and look how we can yeah,
Thank you.
find a solution.
Thank you. So, Brian, you introduced something very interesting. You mentioned RCS. We're really talking about rich business messaging here. So, RBM, the A2P version of it.
Yeah.
Do you see that really in future being used, for example, for single message? Because we actually have a brand new working group within MEF focusing on RBM, the single message side of things, because there are a good few members within MEF who feel strongly that actually RCS, it's a new way of positioning RCS with mobile operators such as yourself, and saying actually that RCS, great, it's fantastic for conversational, but also it can be used for one-way messaging. Is that something you're seeing more?
Yeah, I mean, look, I suppose ideally it's rich messaging, so it's for rich communications. But that doesn't mean it can't be a fallback for one-way communications. And where you've got, you know, again, if you think about the price point, in some cases it's a guest cloud, so the operator isn't necessarily involved, and therefore they don't get revenue contribution if an RCS terminates on their network. So if you think about brands trying to, again, manage their cost, an RCS is considered cheap, quality, cheap, because there's two things, quality and price. SMS is not broken, it's quality. The problem is the price. So, and I think I take on board your point about SMS has a value, and you know, the Visa card is a good one, and the PIN coming the second day. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. SMS has a huge value compared to, you know, a call center or making a phone call or whatever. It's very, very cost effective. I think what's scaring the market is the fact that the prices are going up in some cases by hundreds of % a year. So as a user trying to manage your cost, and you have this cost base that just almost seems like it's kind of on a crazy trajectory, that's very hard to manage. So they want stability. So even if you had a high price, but you had a stable high price, that would be a lot better than this continual kind of, you know, maybe every 3-6 months, you know, a doubling of the price. Now that's an extreme example, but I, you know, to make the point. So we need certainty.
Brian makes a very good point, Carlos, about the certainty side of things. And enterprises want that. If I'm looking after, if it could be the chief security officer of an enterprise, or it could be on the marketing side of things. So whether it's the two-factor authentication or sending marketing and transactional information out to my clients, I've got a budget and I'm working to a budget. It's not unlimited. I need to know that for the next 6 months or the next year, that this is going to be my spend on that solution. And that's been blown out of the water now. Generally, we're talking generally because Igor made a very good point as well, saying passkey, yes, at the moment it's free, it's unknown, no one knows about it and it's free, but that will absolutely change because when MMS came, it was introduced, it was free. The mobile operators made it free for the first month or two, then implemented a commercial model which placed it higher than SMS. So how can we bring back stability to the enterprises who want to know, this is what I'm going to spend on authentication this year?
So free, I mean, SMS has never been free, honestly, at the very beginning, but for the brands it's never been free. And for a long time they were okay with the price. The value they were getting from SMS was just totally worth the price. So the problem is not free, is right price point. And I think that passkey is free. There's a lot of APIs that that because it's provided by the Androids, by Apple, they're providing already a total of APIs for their maps, etc., that were free, remain free. So there's but even if it's not free, if it's neglectable, that's what the brands will do. Even if there is a cost, is it a cost that's predictable and neglectable, or worth it? The problem with, as Brian was saying, is that prices are increasing, and sometimes much more than once a year. So you're managing a budget, you have maybe as the buyer for a brand, you have an incentive, a personal incentive for your bonus to be under budget but you cannot control it because nothing is predictable. So what we see, what we heard recently is big brands coming and not necessarily arguing about the price, but say, I want a 3-year price point. I want a commitment that it will not change for 3 years. And I will commit to it just for the peace of mind that this is the price and it will not increase. So this predictability is definitely a problem as well. On flash call, the fact that it's cheaper, look at it. Flash call, if somebody goes to market and gets a flash call and an SMS at the same price, whether it's both 20 cents or both 1 cent, which one will they pick? The SMS. It's a much better user experience. So the only reason to do flash call is because it's substantially cheaper. But will it stay cheaper? No, because the MNO doesn't want to lose the... If the MNO increased the price of SMS, why would he accept a cheaper flash call? He will only accept it for as long as he cannot block it. Once he can block it, it will either increase that flash call to the level of SMS, or it will lower the price of SMS. Pricing is elasticity
Yeah,
is what is missing also in this industry.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Bart, do you know what? It's up to you now to close this because we're going to be running over. This can run and run and run. So closing remarks from yourself, sir.
What Carlos just said is probably the main threat for the industry. If we keep the price at the same level, obviously the enterprises are going to choose SMS because what are they looking for? They are looking for a secure solution, for high user conversion, and this at the best cost, at a good user experience. The flash call user experience is definitely worse, especially on iPhone. It's a disaster for the end users. So that's option B in all cases. If you price it at the same level, people will start looking at completely different solutions, like maybe the passkey. Then they're completely going to move away from the transactional authentication. And coming back to what you and Igor said before, user experience is extremely important. You want to have your user converted. And then on the cost side, the difference with the credit card, it's volumes. Your credit card, you receive it once. You receive that PIN code once by mail, and indeed it's maybe at the cost of €1 or 2. But authentication online, it's happening constantly. Every time when I log into my bank account, I might have to receive a one-time password, or I might have to authenticate.
With PSD regulation,
exactly.
PSD2.
So the volumes are sky high, and that is where the difference sits for the enterprise. I think when building the strategy on the pricing side, we should really put ourselves in the shoes of the enterprises. What do they want? What do they want to achieve? And what are they ready to pay for it? Fantastic. And if we continue to push them in a corner, they will look for something else.
That's fantastic.
Definitely.
So the commercial model is key. And just like to say that MEF, we have various working groups. I mentioned the fraud and revenue assurance. We talk about A2P flash comes up many times. The commercial models working group on the RCS side of things as well, that will be started off soon. And there's a wonderful document which some of the people actually on stage and others here put together on the A2P voice flash call, which was the second most downloaded report of MEF in 2022. We have some questions from the audience. Joanna Kuligowska from Horde. Hi.
Hi. I have a question. In your experience and expertise, what do you think about this? So, in the OTT landscape, we don't see a massive uptake of adoption of flash calling in the application native authentication flows. However, there has been an uptake of alternative verification methods such as flash call, voice OTP, or hybrid scenarios mixed with missed call or drop call, especially in the markets where the A2P rate, international A2P rate is high. So what do you think? Is the increase of alternative channels, voice channels, driven by the enterprise, the brand itself, or is it driven by the aggregator layer? And if we follow this logic, can we consider this an intercept scenario and a manipulation technique and fraud as such?
I think it's very difficult to understand the volumes of OTT traffic and flash calls because the industry, as of today, lacks the tools that could give us this estimate. I mean, enterprises know how much the OTP passwords they send, and hopefully they know via which channel, but we don't have even the slightest idea as for how many tens of millions of flash calls are being sent and received. And if I were to put my Mystic Mac shoes right back on, I would assume that the number of flash calls is significantly higher that the figures that we're reported to, because we report to what we see and we can back up with data. What we don't see is still out there, and we think that flash calls are a lot more large than it's believed. It's comparable with SMS in some markets, sadly, and definitely larger than OTTs.
You see those figures because Juniper put out some research. They were the first research house to put research out into the sector. So, yeah, you've got to start somewhere with the numbers. Any other responses? We've got one more question as well.
Hi there. It's Eamon here from Infobip. First of all, thank you. It's a really good discussion. I think it's pretty fundamental to the future of the industry, this discussion. So if we assume that the current trend in pricing is not going to change, operators are going to continue to milk A2P SMS. There's no reason to believe that they're going to start dropping prices anytime soon. I'd just like to ask the panel, just out of interest, let's say if we're sitting here, say, in 3 years' time, can you pick a winner between the alternatives? So flash calling, WhatsApp, RCS, all the sort of alternative options to A2P SMS for this use case. What do you think will come out as the winner?
Anyone? Igor. Marcus, go on. Get your crystal ball out. Have a go.
This is where you invest in the stock market, or whoever is public. I think it'll be a combination, because I think once you burst the bubble and you have alternative technologies that are viable, then it becomes what option is best. And I mentioned there are two metrics which are important: quality and price. Some senders are happy with maybe low quality, low price. Some will want high quality and as a result high price. Some will have better coverage in some countries. WhatsApp has 90% plus coverage in some territories, less than 50% in others. And I think it'll get much more clever in terms of what technology you use where, in what instance, for the return.
But it depends also on the geographical markets, especially in Asia, where you have SMS high prices. Here the flash call has a larger share than here in Europe, and I think it depends on where it's used, and it's not a matter of winning a WhatsApp or Viber. I think those are applications who use the alternative authentication methods, and therefore I think it's hard to say where you find a winner in the future.
Okay, Bart, we've got to close this session because we're on to the next. I
think the enterprises really need to get to know their customers. If I'm an Android user, I'm on a network where flash calls are allowed and coming on a decent route, why should I not send a flash call to that user? It's probably cheaper, it's going to work. If the user installed my iOS app, yeah, flash calls, I can skip it. I need to send an SMS or maybe a WhatsApp message. So I think the enterprises are going to become a lot smarter in choosing a channel, and that's going to be the most cost optimal for them. And they have that information anyhow. They know which app you installed, whether it's an Android version or an iOS version.
Thank you very much. Well, folks, that's it. I'd like to thank all the speakers, Bart, Carlos, Brian, Marcus, and Igor. Thank you very much.